We unite in this work for the purpose of turning away from the world's way of life to the spiritual way. The world seeks its good in the external realm. It seeks to find peace or joy or satisfaction or supply or home or companionship from out here in the world of people and things. The Master says, "My kingdom is not of this world." And it is literally true that turning to the spiritual path, you learn that the world's weapons will not do for us. The world's manner of protecting itself will not do for us. The world's way of seeking its good will not do for us. And the answer to all of it is in the statement that the kingdom of God is within you. Now, if you think of that literally, it immediately becomes clear why there is no use of going outside to find your good if the kingdom of God is within you. Then the place to seek it would be within. The spiritual revelators of all time have agreed on this, and they have been able to teach their immediate disciples or students how to make contact with that withinness. Because of this, they have been able to lead lives of harmony, of peace, of lack of battle. But the disciples, in their turn, seem to have had difficulty in passing it on to those of the next generation. And they, in turn, have had difficulty, so that spiritual teachings have thrived principally during the immediate lifetime of their revelator, and to a lesser degree for another generation or two. In the experience of the Master, his era lasted 300 years, probably the longest one of which we have any knowledge. His spiritual teaching was actually in power for 300 years before it died, before it left the earth. And since that time, there have been individual mystics who have caught the vision of withinness, but they have had just the ordinary experience of some measure of success with their immediate disciples, and for a very short while afterward. Although there is a period in human history that runs from the 12th to the 17th century. In every one of those centuries, there were spiritual mystics with very large followings, reaching all the way from Switzerland to England. And all of them had their wide followings of people who attained this spiritual vision. But throughout that period, the church persecuted all of these religious teachings until by the 17th century they had all been wiped off the earth. Now, in this revival of it, we are in a different era. In the first place, since the last appearance on earth of spiritual or mystical teachings, the largest, the greatest nations on earth have sanctioned freedom of religious worship, so that there is no direct persecution of spiritual teachings, either from the church or from the state. Here and there you will find minor attempts at persecution, but in the largest part of the world, there is a greater degree of freedom, and so the spiritual life can be practiced without fear of outside persecution. The second transition that has taken place, it is understood now that we need not fight the church. We need not try to tear down the church. We have learned, first of all, that the church isn't an evil institution, that there isn't any reason to do away with it, but that through this process of evolution that always is taking place in history, eventually the church itself will be presenting to the world spiritual teachings concerning the spiritual life, and embracing it. That is already noticed in one of the very large Protestant churches in England that has already sanctioned spiritual healing and has set aside funds for the study of spiritual healing and spiritual teachings by their ministers. And one of the major churches, one of the largest of the Protestant denominations in the United States, that last year notified its ministers that they were to adopt a friendly attitude towards spiritual healing and so forth. And so you see that our days are past of being persecuted by the church or our trying to destroy a church. And in that better relationship that exists between all of us, there is a higher understanding of the purpose, not only of spiritual teaching, but a higher understanding of the true nature and function of the church. And so the day is coming when, just as we are witnessing many, many men and women from the materia medica world studying spiritual subjects, so we are finding not only individuals in the church, but whole churches themselves opening themselves to spiritual teachings. And so you see that this era of spiritual good is just around the corner. We're very close to it. It is coming upon us more rapidly than any of us can know. Now, spiritual living is based not on the observance of forms, ceremonies, rites, or creeds, but on the ability to contact God. Let it be understood once and for all, there is a God. And not only there is a God, but there is a God at hand, closer than breathing, our poet tells us, nearer than hands and feet. And our Master tells us that the kingdom of this God is within you. Now then, since there is a God, it becomes necessary that you and I know this God. Acquaint now thyself with him, and he shall direct thy path. You will be at peace. Him whom to know aright is life eternal. If we are all that we do not know him aright, if we are not having the harmonies and the peace, the prosperity to which we are entitled as children of God, then let's be fair about it and acknowledge that we have not made his acquaintanceship. We have not become acquainted with him. Because to become acquainted with him is really to have all our ways directed and to be kept in peace. To know him aright is really and truly to receive the blessing of life eternal, life harmonious, the good life. In my original entry into this work, success came to me very quickly, and with it a goodly manner of prosperity. But I moved to another city, and I took upon me larger obligations. And outwardly it seemed as if I made a mistake, because while I continued to be very successful in the healing work, I was very unsuccessful in demonstrating supply. And I found myself with a very severe problem. The problem of lack and limitation. The problem of maintaining a family with an insufficient income. The problem of doing beautiful healing work, being engaged in it all day and all night, and yet not having a sufficient return to keep the wheels of commerce greased. And one day the problem was rather acute, and it had me puzzled, because for 2 years now I had been in the work, had demonstrated beyond question that healings were taking place. Not only healings were taking place, but supply was being met for others. And yet here was this personal problem of mine. And so you can imagine that I had no rest, because it was necessary to know the answer to that. It probably wasn't necessary that I eat or drink or be clothed, but it was necessary that I know the answer to how to accomplish it, and why it's accomplished, and when it's accomplished, for the sake of those who were trusting in my understanding. And on this particular day, walking along, the thought came to me that if I really knew God, this couldn't happen. I really believe the Bible when it says, "I have never seen the righteous begging bread." And so it must be not that there was any fault with God or truth, but the fault must lie with me. Evidently, I wasn't righteous in that sense. Evidently, I didn't have the right idea of supply. Something surely was wrong, and the unfoldment was clear. that it was my lack of understanding God that was responsible for this situation. Now, at first glance, that seems impossible, that a person should be actively engaged in spiritual work and actually bringing about healings and still not know God, not have the correct understanding of God. It seemed impossible. And so I thought, it must be true, Scripture is true, the fault is entirely with me, and here it must be that I do not know God. But surely I can test this out and very quickly see whether or not I know God. What is God? And then I began to give all the answers that you are probably giving in your mind. But I quickly realized that that couldn't be truth because that wasn't my knowledge. I was quoting. God is love. John said that. I didn't know it. God is law. I suppose Moses said that, but I didn't know it. God is a principle. Mrs. Eddy said that. I didn't know it. And so I quickly realized that whatever I knew about God wasn't a knowledge about God, it was quotations about God. Quotations of things that other people knew about God. Nothing that I knew. When it came right down to it, I knew nothing but quotations. I did not know God. And there's quite a difference between knowing God and knowing statements of truth about God. Quite a different thing. And I pondered the subject then of what is God and what do I know about God, and no answer came. And then I began to think about man and the idea of what man is, what I am. And it was quite a long walk, but at least it resulted in this, that I realized that God is the I of my being, the I am. Not my humanhood, not my personal mind or powers or understanding, but the I am of me, the very I or spiritual selfhood of me. God constitutes that. God is that. God is the very life, the very soul. God is the consciousness of individual man. God is the mind of individual man. If that is true, then all that God has is part of man. All that the Father hath is mine. All of the God mind is man's mind. All of the God soul is man's soul. All of God's spirit is man's spirit. All of God's supply is man's supply. All of God's love is man's love. Why? Because I and the Father are one, and all that the Father hath is mine. It is that oneness that constitutes the infinity of our being. In and of ourselves we would be nothing. But since God constitutes our real being, since God is the Father of our real being, then God has established the fullness of His wisdom in us, the fullness of His love in us, the fullness of His life in us, the fullness of His supply in us. The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, and Son, all that I have is thine. You see, that immediately changed the situation. That immediately changed my life. That immediately changed my understanding. Because now came the realization that since this allness constitutes individual being, Our good does not have to come to us from outside, but it has to be contacted from inside. And it wasn't long after that, as you know, God has a way of meeting our need at every level. It wasn't long after that when I came across Browning's poem that we must not try to open an entry for good to come to us from without, but rather we must open out a way for the imprisoned splendor to escape. In other words, all of the good is within us. All of eternality, immortality, all of Godhood, all of Christhood, all of spirituality is embodied within us, but we must open out a way for the imprisoned splendor to escape. Now just watch the miracle that takes place as you realize that this splendor of God, this infinite love, this infinite life, this divine wisdom, this spiritual grace, the Comforter, is already within you. This that multiplies loaves and fishes, this that heals the sick and preaches to the poor the gospel, this that opens the eyes of the blind, is already within you. Even when you are reading truth books, you must remember not to try to add spiritual power to yourself or spiritual wisdom to yourself, but rather to read for a further understanding that all of this is already contained within you. Now, this immediately changes your mode of life. You no longer look outside to persons. A wife immediately loses the feeling that she's dependent on her husband. The husband immediately loses the feeling that he's dependent on his position or his investments or his business. Each one immediately comes to the realization that even though supply may come through those channels, and they're all legitimate, that the source of supply is within oneself. And in the realization of that, new avenues open, larger avenues open, and fear disappears, that in case one should be closed, that no others would open. Because in the realization that all of this is within oneself, it can open anew every single day. Now, probably this would be a good point to continue for a moment on this subject of supply, because supply outwardly takes many forms. Supply outwardly takes the form of money, food, clothing, housing, and transportation, capital in business, so forth and so on. These are the forms that supply takes. But supply itself is not a form. Supply itself is never seen by human eyes. Supply is never felt with human fingers. Supply is never heard or tasted. Supply is spirit, and supply is within you. It is never visible, and it never becomes visible. You behold in the outer world the forms that supply assumes, but the supply itself you never see. And that is why we can, like Moses, realize that we do not have to live on yesterday's manna, nor do we have to pick manna for tomorrow, because supply is infinite, and supply is omnipresent wherever you may be. You'll never see it, so you'll never have any evidence of it in so far as eyesight is concerned. You will have to understand through your spiritual discernment that this is true. And then later, you will see the proof of it, not by ever seeing supply, but by seeing the forms which supply assumes. Just like truth. You will never see truth, and you will never hear truth. Truth is invisible and inaudible. But in a book you may read the symbols of truth, and in your ear you may hear the symbols of truth, but that is not truth. Truth itself is within you, and truth itself is spirit, and truth itself is God. And therefore, what you read in a book or what you hear with your ear, these are but the symbols of truth. Money is a symbol of supply. The fruit on trees or the crops in the ground, these are symbols of supply. These are forms which supply assumes, but supply itself is invisible, and it is within you. If you will remember in the book The Infinite Way, there is the illustration there on supply of the orange tree. And it is brought out there very clearly that oranges, even to the orange grower, isn't supply. Why? Because when his oranges have been picked and sold, or the wind has blown them away, or the crop has had worms in it and been destroyed, the supply is still there, because the supply is operating inside of the tree and will appear in its due season as another crop of oranges. And then when you take that crop of oranges away, you still haven't used up your supply, because the supply is going to appear next season in another crop of forms of supply. And so it is that in our lifetime, where we have had 2 wars and a major depression and a few minor ones that have deprived many people of wealth or abundance, to experience lack and limitation and sometimes total lack, it hasn't been too long until they have reestablished themselves, some to a greater extent than they originally were. And the reason is that even in losing their money, they did not lose their supply. They still had that which was the cause of money, which may have been intelligence, energy, ideas, inspiration. And so you see that ideas, inspiration, intelligence, wisdom, service, love, these bring about the forms of supply, but these are invisible. These are always invisible, though the forms are visible. Just so it is that often in the sale of a business, there will be an item tacked on at the bottom, goodwill. And I know of one case in the States where a business sold its assets for $500,000, but its goodwill for $1 million. The intangible was worth more than the physical assets of the corporation. The goodwill, something that no one can ever see, hear, taste, touch, or smell. It's an intangible. And so it is with every poet, every author, every sculptor, every painter, every composer. It is the invisible which is the substance of the visible. If they didn't have an inner light, an inner inspiration, an inner something, it would never appear outwardly as a poem or story or book or teaching or painting or any other form of art. Now, actually, if you can accept this, you will be receiving one of the most practical lessons you have ever had in life, because it will help you to stop trying to demonstrate supply. And if you once stop the attempt to demonstrate supply, you will find yourself in possession of abundance. Why? That which you are trying to demonstrate isn't supply. It is a form of supply, and after you've got it, it isn't permanent. After you've got it, you use it up and have to do the work all over again of demonstrating. Life must be a terribly laborious thing, every week to have to demonstrate fresh supply, or every month to have to, and it isn't necessary. You only have to demonstrate once, and supply rolls forever. And you never again have to take thought for what you shall eat or what you shall drink or wherewithal you shall be clothed, if you demonstrate supply. But if you demonstrate forms of supply, they break, they get eaten up, they wear out, and then comes that old round again of rent day and close day and holiday and the need again for new demonstration. Now stop it and demonstrate supply once and for all, and then let that supply appear outwardly as form in its own way. And the way to demonstrate supply is, first of all, recognize that supply is God, or God is supply. And so all you have to demonstrate is God, and that's all. That's all. You have one demonstration to make, and that demonstration is God. You have to demonstrate the realization of God within you. You have to demonstrate the consciousness of the presence of God. You have to demonstrate the awareness of God's presence. And once you've done that, the rest automatically follows. Every season, in due season, a new crop appears. Every time new shoes are needed, they appear. Every time a new automobile is needed, it appears. Every time the rent is due, it appears. Why? Because you have demonstrated infinity. Remember that. Infinity. It is like demonstrating eternality. Once you demonstrate eternality, all you have to do is let the clock tick off the minutes. And when enough will have gone by, you'll find that you are getting around toward infinity. But you have nothing to do with time. You don't demonstrate time, and you don't demonstrate youth. Nobody can demonstrate youth. Nobody can demonstrate youthfulness. Nobody can demonstrate themselves one day younger than they are. But you can demonstrate life eternal, but the way to do it is to demonstrate God, because God is life eternal. So when you demonstrate God, you demonstrate life eternal. God is the source of all supply. Everyone acknowledges that. Then when you have demonstrated God, you have the whole source of supply, the whole multiplier of loaves and fishes, the multiplier of all the crops on all the trees and in all the ground. And so it is, in this work, you have but one demonstration to make, and that is the realization of God, and you can't make that anywhere outside your own consciousness. That has to be made within your own consciousness. It isn't something external to you. It isn't an experience external to you. It's an experience that takes place within your own consciousness. Now, the same thing is true of health. You will eventually stop the attempt to demonstrate health. And the reason is you never will succeed. You can demonstrate an individual healing sometimes, but that isn't health, because the next week or the next month the same thing or some other thing can return, showing that you haven't demonstrated health. If you had demonstrated health, health would be continuous. You have merely demonstrated an individual healing, and sometimes not even that. But in the moment when you agree that you no longer want to demonstrate health, you want to demonstrate God, who is the health of my countenance. When you have demonstrated the awareness of God, you have demonstrated your health. But not merely a healing. Oh no, far beyond a healing. You have demonstrated your unchanging health, the continuity of health and harmony of body. But separate and apart from the demonstration of God, it cannot be accomplished. Now remember this. You can be healed by a doctor. You can be healed physically. You can be healed mentally. But you can't demonstrate health that way. You demonstrate health through the demonstration of God. In the same way that you can raise funds, you can work for money this month, or borrow it. Some few people have been able to get away with stealing it for a short while. But the point is that that is not the demonstration of supply. The demonstration of supply is the demonstration of the realization of God. God is the source and fount of all supply, and having God, you have all that belongs to God. Son, thou art ever with me, all that I have is thine. So as long as you are ever with God, and so long as you ever have God with you, you have supply. You have all that the Father hath. And that will appear externally as health. It will appear externally as money, externally as transportation, or any other thing of which you have need. You will find really that the demonstration of God is the most practical experience in your whole life. You will find that there is no practicality in anything but the demonstration of God, because regardless of how practical it may seem to do these things by human means, it is far more practical to have achieved the realization of God and then been able to say with Paul, I live, yet not I, Christ is doing all this. Or, I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. Christ, which is my wisdom. Christ, which is the presence and power that goes before us to make the crooked places straight. Now, a question arises in your thought. And on the subject of questions, should you have any questions for the balance of our work here, please write them out very clearly and always leave them up here before the meeting, before the class, and I will endeavor to answer them. That is the only opportunity we have for answering questions, is through the answering of these written questions. Now, a question naturally comes to your thought. Let us assume for a moment that the way of life, the way of harmony, the way of peace, and the way of abundance is demonstrating the presence of God, demonstrating the consciousness of God's presence, demonstrating an awareness of God's presence, demonstrating a realization of God, demonstrating a God experience. How do we achieve it? That is the legitimate question. How do we achieve it? And the answer according to the infinite way, there are other answers, but the answer according to the infinite way is this. In the first place, the reading and study of the correct letter of truth will be a step in that direction. The hearing of truth in the ear is another step. It has been discovered that reading books of truth, where it is the correct letter of truth, is one way toward realization. It has been found that hearing truth is even better than reading it. But reading it and hearing it together is almost resultant in miracles of understanding. So that reading the Word and hearing the Word constitute two of the ways discovered for coming into the realization of God. But actually, there is a third step that is greater than the first two and yet dependent on the first two, but really greater. When you have heard the Word, or when you have read the Word and have it within your consciousness, meditation brings it into life. Meditation brings the experience to a focus, to a head, to an actual realization. And so the practice of meditation after reading and hearing is the most important function in your whole life. Reading and hearing alone will lead you to it, but meditation will shorten the time by 90%. Meditation is one of the most powerful ways ever discovered of attaining God realization. And the reason is this. Meditation takes your thought entirely away from the outside world and brings it within yourself, and that's where the kingdom of God is. And so that's where you'll have to find God, within yourself. And since a God experience is an activity of your consciousness and has to be experienced through your consciousness, when you are within yourself, within your own consciousness, you are at that place where the experience takes place. You are at that place where the demonstration of God takes place. It never takes place outside of your being. It always takes place inside your being. Now, how do we meditate? Well, of course, for those who continue in the study of the infinite way, you will find in every one of the writings at least one chapter on meditation, prayer, communion. And those three subjects really embrace meditation, so that you have the writings as guides. Those of you who hear the tape recordings will find in almost every recording a meditation. In fact, some of the recordings are a solid hour of meditation. And through these, you will be brought into the actual meditation. That is, not merely learning how, but they go further than teaching you how. They actually bring it about within you. Just as our meditation can do it for you here in this room. There's no reason why anyone in this room should not, before we are through, have experienced at least a taste or touch of God consciousness, because the work that is done here and the meditation that is done here has that for its object. You notice in our literature that we speak much of healing, not only the physical healing, physical, mental, moral, financial, but do not be mistaken and believe that that is why we are in existence, just to heal your bodies. Nothing could be further from the truth. We actually are not too much interested in healing your bodies as such. Our interest is in opening individual to God experience, because inevitably health follows. It is an impossibility to commune with God very much without that communion taking the form of better health, better supply, better temperament, better temper, better character. Because the very presence of God is a purifying agency. Now, it is the right thing and the natural thing and the normal thing to have health. And even physical health is sometimes better than disease, although disease is more helpful for one's spiritual awakening, because healthy people very seldom turn to the study of God, more especially if they not only are healthy but have enough supply. Then they're so completely taken care of on the outer plane that they feel no need for turning to God. You'd be surprised how many times people have said that very thing. Oh yes, I know it must be a wonderful thing to know God, and when I'm older I'm going to turn to it. But I have no need of it right now. I am healthy and I'm young and have plenty of supply. And I'm sure that that's the way many people feel, because you will find that most people turn to God in their own incompleteness, whether it's an incompleteness of health or supply or human relationships. Then it is that they wonder, can God do something for me? And so it is that very often physical discomfort is the greatest ally of God. Well, let us get back to meditation. The first thing that is complained of by young students is that when they meditate, unruly thoughts, uncontrolled thoughts run around in their mind. And their first effort is to stop this or to get rid of it. And let me tell you to begin with that you can't succeed. So don't waste any more time trying to stop these unruly thoughts or unwelcome thoughts that come into your mind when you meditate. Ignore them. Just completely ignore them and go about your own business of doing what you've come into meditation to do. Let us do it something like this. I want to meditate, and up here there are a lot of thoughts running around, world thoughts, fear thoughts sometimes, pain, sensuality, a lot of things. But I know from long experience that these thoughts are not yours. These are not your thoughts. Don't get angry at yourself for thinking thoughts that you don't like, because you are not thinking them. They're not yours. They are world thoughts. And we, in the beginning, while we're much in this human experience, are like antennas. And we feel world thoughts. If we are among people who are very intensely fearing, we all of a sudden begin to feel a sense of fear within ourselves. And we really think we are fearing, and it isn't we at all. It's we are absorbing a world fear. In the same way, you will find on days when the newspapers are full of bad news, like during the war or in the height of the Depression, you find that people very quickly fall into having the blues and having fear and being depressed, not realizing that they are reacting to this newspaper headlines or radio headlines. And sometimes, even though the eyes do not read the newsprint and the ears do not hear the radio programs, nevertheless, you are enough of an antenna to pick it up out of the air and feel it. After a while in this, you learn to protect yourself from that so that you do not pick up the thoughts of others. That is where the subject of malpractice comes in. There has been always among the, shall we say, how will we term this, nature races, that is, the natives of the various continents, like our Hawaiians in Hawaii, and perhaps your natives here, and the natives of other lands. There has grown up a great superstition among many of them, which is a fear of cursing, a fear of being cursed, a fear that somebody out here can think an evil thought and hurt them. We find traces of that in the States among many different people who stem from original tribes and have not come into education and enlightenment. We have one such group in Pennsylvania and another in New Jersey who absolutely have as part of their religious belief that they can be hexed or cursed. And so if they have gained your enmity, they live in fear that you'll go to a hexer and have them hexed, which means that they'll die or get very sick or may never find their mate, so forth and so on. Among the Hawaiians, there were two groups of kahunas or priests, the good kahuna and the evil kahuna. Now the good kahuna was like a practitioner or teacher in the spiritual teachings. You could go to them for counsel, for guidance, for help, for prayers, for healing, for all manner of good. But the bad kahuna, when you had an enemy, you managed somehow to get a hair of your enemy's head or a little piece of his fingernail, and you took that to the evil kahuna, and the evil kahuna put a curse on your enemy, and lo and behold, the next day he died. And I know you'll be surprised to know that he did too. It actually worked. Well, now, you see the reason for that. The thing which you fear has come upon you. If you can be made to give sufficient power to a hexer or a bad kahuna, they really and truly can cross you up badly. In the same way, if you can really believe that there are people on earth who can malpractice you, I promise you they can. But not because of any power that they have, but because you have invested them with a power, you have accepted the belief, and you suffer from your own belief. Now don't doubt that. That's an absolute truth. Nobody in the world has the power to malpractice you. Nobody. Nobody has the power to cause any evil to appear in your experience. Nobody has the power to do a single harmful thing unto you except that you give them permission, you invite them by entertaining a fear of a power outside your own being. The moment you begin to grasp the idea of God as the only power, you never again will fear the thought of an individual or a group of individuals or a whole nation of individuals. And be very careful about that, because when you are in meditation, the first temptation is either to fear or be disgusted with these thoughts that you cannot keep out of your head. Now, you will keep them out eventually if in the beginning you will ignore them. Don't try to get rid of them. Don't try to stop them. They aren't your thoughts. And you can prove it. Well, we'll prove it within the next 10 minutes. When you go into meditation, you say the word I, and then decide that you are going to think, ponder about God. You are going to take the word God into your consciousness, and you are going to ask yourself, what do I know about God? Even if it's what have I heard or read about God. What is it about God that's as real to me, that I have confidence in, that I have knowledge of? And as you persist in that line of thought or introspection, these thoughts are still going to go on in your head, only you are not going to pay attention to them. You will be able to carry on your introspection, your contemplation of God, even while those thoughts are moving around inside of you, and that alone will prove that your thoughts are subject unto you. These other thoughts are merely ephemeral things that come and go, and when you have learned to continue your contemplative meditation or your introspection, eventually, by starving out these thoughts, they go and never return again. Now, eventually, you must come to a place where you make yourself an instrument for God and deny yourself as an instrument for the human mind, for what might be called mortal mind, or the universal beliefs of mankind. In other words, you should not be receptive or responsive to world thought. If the world wants to think that the weather is bad and they must catch cold, you don't have to accept that. If the world believes in the power of infection and contagion, you don't have to accept that, and you don't have to demonstrate that. You can keep yourself free of the world's beliefs by taking hold of yourself and agreeing consciously agreeing, I and the Father are one. And the activity of the Father is expressed in me and through me. God's wisdom, God's law, God's love governs me and controls me and permeates my entire being. I am subject to divine grace alone. I am subject to God's kingdom. I am subject to God's laws. I am subject to the life of God. God permeates my being. God enfolds me. God governs and guides and maintains and sustains me. I am an instrument. I show forth the handiwork of God. I show forth God's glory. And the world, the devil, hath nothing in me, and findeth nothing in me to respond to. Do you see that? But you must do it consciously. By having been born a human being, you are subject to good and evil. You are subject to truth and you are subject to error. A human being is a combination of good and evil. A human being is subject to good and evil, but the Son of God has no good or evil. He has only the pure Spirit of God within himself. No opposite and no pairs of opposites. And so it is. The transition into sonship must be made consciously by every individual. By birth, we came into this experience as human beings, partly good and partly evil, depending on environment, education, inheritance, and personal experience. But the transition into spiritual sonship comes only as an individual experience and must be accomplished consciously, as a conscious act of your own being.